Camerata.
We want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is New Day. It is Friday, July 21st, 6 o'clock here in Washington, D.C. Chris is off and John Berman joins me from New York. Great to see you, John.
Nice to see you.
Here's our starting line. The New York Times and the Washington Post reporting that President Trump's legal team is trying to undermine special counsel Robert Mueller by looking for conflicts of interest in order to discredit his Russia investigation. The Washington Post also reporting that the president is asking advisors about his ability to pardon his aides, his family members, and even himself.
Meantime, one day after President Trump warned the special counsel not to dig into his family's finances, Bloomberg reports that special counsel Mueller's investigation is expanding to do just that. All this as CNN learns that President Trump is shaking up his legal team. The president unhappy with how his lawyers are fighting back against the daily Russia revelations. We have this all covered for you. A lot going on. We're going to begin with CNN's senior Washington correspondent Joe Johns live at the White House. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, John. The reshuffling of the president's legal team comes around the same time he's sending signals that he's gearing up for a fight against special counsel Robert Mueller's legal team, citing conflicts in an interview with the New York Times. This comes amid reports the president is seeking to undermine the investigation.
The New York Times and Washington Post are reporting that the president's lawyers and aides are looking to undermine the special counsel's investigation. The Times says Trump's team is scouring the professional and political backgrounds of Robert Mueller and other investigators, looking for conflicts of interest they can use to discredit the investigation. The Post also reporting that the president has been asking about his authority to pardon aides, family members, and even himself in connection with the probe. Attorney General Jeff Sessions refusing to answer questions about whether he's discussed pardons with the president in testimony before Congress last month.
I'm not able to comment on conversations with high officials within the White House.
All this as the Russia investigation appears to be widening. Bloomberg reporting that Mueller is expanding his probe to include a broad range of financial transactions involving Trump businesses and associates.
Would that be a breach of what his actual...
I would say yes. Yeah, I would say yes.
The president warning Mueller against delving into his finances earlier this week.
The president's making clear that the special counsel should not move outside of the scope of the investigation.
The Washington Post reports that the president has told aides he's especially disturbed after learning that Mueller would be able to access his tax returns. The president has refused to release them, citing ongoing IRS audits. Mueller has broad latitude. Sources say the president has also vented in recent weeks that his legal team has not done enough to beat back allegations.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Sources tell CNN Mark Kasowitz, the president's longtime attorney and lead lawyer on the Russia matter, will see his role reduced after the spokesman and communications strategist for the legal team resigned.
Mr. President, does Jeff Sessions still have your full support?
Thank you, everybody.
President Trump ignoring questions about his embattled attorney general after blaming him for the special counsel probe.
Sessions should have never recused himself. And if he was going to recuse himself, he should have told me before he took the job, and I would have picked somebody else.
Sessions signaling Thursday he has no plans to step down, despite the president's remarkable public rebuke.
We love this job, we love this department, and I plan to continue to do so as long as that is appropriate.
Despite this morning's reports, a source says the president's team does intend to cooperate fully with the special counsel. The focus on the special counsel and the president's own words in that New York Times interview overshadowing, if you will, the attempts of this administration once again to focus on policy. Today, we do expect to see the president this afternoon as he meets with the survivors of the USS Arizona. John and John, back
Allison,
to you.
I'll take it now. Thanks so much,
okay.
Joe. All right, so lots to discuss. Let's bring in our panel. We have CNN political analyst David Drucker, CNN senior legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin, and CNN political and national security analyst David Sanger. Great to have all of you. David Drucker, I'll start with you because you and I are together here in Washington. So let's talk about this. Is the thinking of President Trump's legal team that if anyone on Mueller's team has ever, say, given money to a Democratic candidate, that they therefore cannot be unbiased and impartial and that would somehow taint the investigation.
Well, I think that's the message that the president is trying to send. In some ways, this is reminiscent of the special counsel, special prosecutor that looked into President Bill Clinton, where there was an all-out war from the White House trying to discredit Ken Starr so that any result of his investigation would be tainted. And so what you're seeing here from this president, with the difference that the president can actually, although it would be complicated and politically explosive, could actually fire Mueller because there's no longer a special prosecutor law protecting Mueller. But what the president is trying to do, like he tries to do with all of his political adversaries, is undermine his credibility and legitimacy. So at least in the eyes of his very loyal base and the broader Republican electorate, which has kept the Republicans on Capitol Hill at bay because they still support him, they are not going to buy anything that Mueller comes up with. And I think that's the shot across the bow that we've seen this week.
You know, it's been really interesting. I mean, in a way, the president's interview with the New York Times was Chekhov's gun. You know, we saw the gun in the first act, the president talking about conflicts, and then overnight in the New York Times and the Washington Post, these stories are, you know, pointing out alleged conflicts as a concerted, you know, direction that they're doing from this legal team. Let me read you what the president said again in that New York Times interview. Mueller was up here and he wanted the job. The next day he is appointed special counsel. I said, what the hell is this about? Talk about conflicts? But he was interviewing for the job. There are many other conflicts that I haven't said, you know, subtext, but may come out tomorrow night in the Washington Post and New York Times. You know, Jeffrey Toobin, what is a real conflict of interest which would be grounds for Rod Rosenstein to fire Bob Mueller?
I don't think. It's hard to know in the abstract of what is a conflict of interest.
If Robert Mueller was talking about the FBI job, would that be a conflict of interest?
Absolutely not.
If there were political donations from people inside Mueller's team to some Democrats, and we know there were, is that a conflict of interest?
It is certainly not a conflict of interest justifying firing. You know, as a journalist who spent a good deal of time investigating Ken Starr and his staff and their political inclinations, I think it is entirely fair for Trump's team to point out if Mueller is hiring lots of partisan Democrats. I don't think he is, but if that's true, it's a perfectly legitimate issue for Trump's people to investigate. They are not Mueller. Mueller is the decision maker, and if there is a less political person in a prominent place in American life, I don't know who it is. Mueller is a very clean and apolitical record.
So, David Sanger, much of this comes from the New York Times reporting, your outlet, but there's also some Washington Post reporting this morning that says that the president and his team are also exploring how far-reaching the president's pardon authority is. Obviously, the implication is if Don Jr. were in trouble, maybe if Jared Kushner were in trouble, what could the president do about that?
Well, when you read into the story, it says he's asking the question, but not necessarily with an eye toward trying to do that anytime soon. What you don't know with this president is that he is, obviously a man of some passions, and the question is, could the same moment of passion that led him to fire Jim Comey lead him to issue the pardon or attempt to fire Mueller or take one of these other steps? Now, it was interesting, in the Times interview, he said again that he does not regret firing Jim Comey. But when you think back to it, it was the firing of Comey that basically brought all of this upon him. It's what forced the Deputy Attorney General to appoint Bob Mueller as a special counsel. It's what then triggered the rest of this set of investigations. Had he kept Comey in place, there would certainly be an FBI investigation underway, but there wouldn't be any of this structure that we're seeing now that clearly the president finds so disturbing. I think the last point, and this goes back to something that Jeff got at before, which is that at the moment that Mueller was appointed, you heard a lot of Republicans saying that he was a perfect choice. He's very nonpartisan. His war record in Vietnam is remarkable. His time as FBI director. And so the president probably realizes that it's going to be an uphill battle to go make the case for partisanship that he's now pushing.
You know, it's interesting. David Sanger says, you don't always know what the president's thinking. In some cases, we know exactly what he's thinking. We know the words conflict of interest are seared on his brain right now, and he seems to be wanting to say it out loud, when he's interviewed with the New York Times and have his people talk about it in articles. And we also know, because again, this was part of his interview and we heard him say it out loud, and then his people have been saying it since, he's very concerned about the parameters of the Bob Mueller, of the special counsel's investigation right now. And the president does not think it should expand into his business dealings, particularly from when he was before he was president. Listen again to the president himself and now the president's staff talking about this.
Mueller was looking at your finances, your family's finances, unrelated to Russia. Is that a red line?
Would that be a breach of what his actual?
I would say yes. Yeah, I would say yes.
I think that the president, the point he's trying to make is that the clear purpose of the Russia investigation is to review Russia's meddling in the election, and that should be the focus of the investigation, nothing beyond that. The president's making clear that the special counsel should not move outside of the scope of the investigation.
David Drucker, the president says he doesn't like to give red lines. That seems like a red line there coming from his mouth and his staff's mouth there, despite the fact that Rod Rosenstein's charge for Robert Mueller, includes matters that might arise during the investigation.
I don't see how you look at an investigation into Russian meddling and how the president's campaign may have been implicated without looking into the president's business dealings, especially because the president has not released his tax returns. And one important thing that David Sanger was getting at here, if the president were to move to fire Robert Mueller, the most anxiety you'd see in Washington would be coming from Capitol Hill, because Republicans do not want to have to deal with this. They'd rather focus on mundane policy matters, important policy matters, but things that are a lot less political, and they don't want to be in a position where they have to act against the president or move against the president, at least not before they've seen a signal from Republican voters that that's what they would like them to do. And so that's who would be most concerned about this, because it would put them in a really difficult political position. And that's why you've heard, some complaints from the Hill about where the Mueller investigation might go, but you haven't heard a lot, because they understand what the scope of the investigation needs to be. And they had shoved this off on Mueller so they could get out of having to have anything to do with it.
So, Jeffrey, the Washington Post is reporting that President Trump has expressed concerns about Mueller getting his tax returns. As you know, the president did not release his tax returns. Legally, can Robert Mueller pull those?
Absolutely. There's no doubt that he can. In fact, in white-collar investigations, it is routine for for prosecutors, assistant U.S. attorneys, to get tax returns as first of all, to investigate whether there are tax offenses that may have been committed, but also as a guide to the assets of the people you are investigating. And frankly, given the fact that what the question of motive is at the heart of this investigation. Why was the Trump campaign so favorably disposed towards Russia? Financial motive is an obvious possibility, so I would find it very hard to imagine that this investigation could be completed without Mueller looking at the president's tax return.
David Sanger, you've been in Washington a long time and covered many administrations. I found this week to be an astounding week from the White House in terms of their messaging. They had the health care debate, and it apparently falling apart, maybe not falling apart in the Senate. And then completely by choice, electively, the president goes to the New York Times and knifes his attorney general, raises the possibility of taking on the special counsel. And now in articles in the New York Times and the Washington Post, someone's floating the idea that the president is considering pardons. This seems to be a White House that has completely lost control of controlling any kind of message here.
Well, message discipline has not been their greatest strength in the 6 months and now a day that they've been in office. When you think about that, it's the other downside of the president's tweeting, the president's determining that he's got to be completely the one who does the communication because he thinks he does it better than anybody else. The tweets, the interviews, and so forth always veer toward what he feels most strongly about at the moment. And he clearly does not view it as a reaction to anything he's done, including the firing of Jim Comey, but instead he views it as an effort to conduct what he's called many times a witch hunt. So that tends to dominate it. So if it's Made in America week, or it's let's focus on the details of healthcare week, his mind is not necessarily right there. And you saw it in the healthcare debate where a number of Republican senators said the president did not seem to be deeply engaged in the details of what the health care bill should look like. In fact, White House didn't have its own. Instead, he just wanted to have a win. And you have to wonder, if it doesn't look like he's going to get that, if he'll just move on to the next thing.
Made in America week, when it comes to the Russia investigation, and the focus on it right now is a Made in the Oval Office week, because the president has exclusively, I think, created this renewed focus over the last few days. All right, guys, stick around. President Trump's relationship with Attorney General Jeff Sessions put to the test. The Attorney General says he's not going anywhere. No one would have asked that question if not for the fact that the president gave this remarkable rebuke to the New York Times. Is loyalty a one-way street for President Trump? We discuss next.
New Day, brought to you by Dunkirk from Warner Brothers Pictures. Written and directed by Christopher Nolan. Dunkirk, now playing.
Team Romans, it is Friday morning.
Nice
to have
Friday.
you here. Dave has the day off, but I get Miguel for the next half hour. 5:30 in the East. Up first, explosive new reporting this morning. The president's lawyers are looking for ways to undermine the Russia investigation by Special Counsel Robert Mueller. The Washington Post and the New York Times report attorneys and aides are scouring the backgrounds of Mueller and his staff, searching for conflicts of interest they can use to undercut the Russia probe. The papers cite several sources familiar with this research effort.
Now, the Washington Post reporting the president is asked about his power to pardon aides, family members, even himself. One advisor told the Post the president was simply curious about the reach of his pardoning authority. This follows the president's earlier attacks on Mueller and other officials connected to the Russia investigation.
Now, with all that in mind, the president is reshuffling the legal team charged with helping him navigate the Russia probe. Two sources tell CNN the president's longtime personal attorney, Mark Kasowitz, will see his role as lead lawyer on the Russia investigation diminish. Now, veteran attorney, Washington attorney John Dowd and another Trump lawyer, Jay Sekulow, will take the lead as the president's personal attorneys on the Russia inquiry.
Sources say by working outside the White House, Dowd and Sekulow's dealings with the president will be protected by the same attorney-client privilege afforded all U.S. citizens. Inside the White House, Attorney Ty Cobb will take the lead on legal and communication strategy for Russia. He'll be effectively replacing communications strategist Mark Corallo, who resigned on Thursday.
All right, let's break all of these new developments down this morning. Political economist Greg Valliere is here, chief strategist at Horizon Investments, and part of his job is to look at what's happening inside the Beltway and what's happening, in global markets and figure out what each means for the other. So he's deeply sourced here for us. Glad to have you here this morning. I want you to listen to something that yesterday we heard from Sarah Huckabee Sanders, one of the president's spokeswomen, about the special counsel and the scope of the investigation in particular.
I think that the president, the point he's trying to make is that the clear purpose of the Russia investigation is to review Russia's meddling in the election, and that should be the focus of the investigation, nothing beyond that. The president's making clear that the special counsel should not move outside of the scope of the investigation.
Greg, I want to quote something that was in the Washington Post that I think is fascinating about his tax returns in particular, and I think they relate here. Trump has been fuming about the probe in recent weeks as he has been informed about the legal questions that he and his family could face. He has told aides he was especially disturbed after learning Mueller would be able to access several years of his tax returns. The president has Russia fever. He blames the press for making this about nothing, but he has Russia fever here.
Christine, he almost single-handedly is keeping the story alive. He reignited this firestorm with the New York Times 2 or 3 days ago in the interview. Unfortunately for him, he cannot pick and choose what gets investigated. That's up to Mueller. And I do think that There's something about Trump's tax returns that gets him extremely agitated. I don't think it's that he didn't pay any taxes. I think we all know that. I think his tax returns list sources where he has money, where he owes money. And I think some of those sources are in Russia.
It seems so simple. The more you tell the cop, don't look in the basement, the more the cop wants to look in the basement. It's absolutely bizarre.
And any investigator, follow the money is rule number one of any investigation. Follow the money, right?
Indeed. In that New York Times article and wide-ranging interview you mentioned, he didn't exactly express his love for the Attorney General who has been with him, Jeff Sessions, through thick and thin, very early on his campaign. Basically said he wouldn't have picked him if he knew that he was going to recuse himself from Russia. Here's what Jeff Sessions had to say about that.
I have the honor of serving as Attorney General. It's something that goes beyond any thought I would have ever had for myself. We love this job, we love this department, and I plan to continue to do so as long as that is appropriate.
As long as it's appropriate. Right. Reading the tea leaves even from this distance, it doesn't sound exactly like confidence.
No, Miguel, and I would say that when it comes to Sessions, this is still another example of how a lot of quality people don't want to go to work in this administration. Because if the president is willing to throw Sessions under the bus, what does that say about other people who may decide maybe it's not worth my while to join this group?
There are some Republicans who have been telling me that while all this is happening, there's real work being done behind the scenes. That Stephen Mnuchin is moving forward on plans for tax reform. That Paul Ryan is working on, with House Republicans on their budget proposal or their budget that the committee has already passed. Well, is that true? Is there work being done? And do you see the president's policy agenda slowly moving forward, or is all of this noise slowing his policy agenda?
I think the agenda is moving a bit on taxes, maybe in spite of him rather than because of him. But I do think that there's some real progress being made by Mnuchin, Congressman Brady, head of the Ways and Means Committee, Paul Ryan. I do think that we'll get a tax outline this fall and we'll see progress there. Unfortunately for them, they first have to get some budget issues resolved, and that could be almost as contentious as the health care stuff.
Greg, we've seen these theme weeks. This week is Made in America week. And sometimes, they have these like nice events where they can promote something. They promoted this new injectable glass thing yesterday, which is fair. It's going to be 4,000 jobs. That's legit. Yet on the same day, Mar-a-Lago and a golf course in Jupiter, Florida, owned by the Trump family. They're filing for more foreign workers. So the buy American, hire American, except if you're one of my companies. Does that stuff undermine his message?
It does. I think that it's really hard for him to stay on message. That's one of the problems. But I should say for the markets, you made a really good point. I think there's some progress being made behind the scenes. I think there's a very pro-business climate here in Washington. The economic fundamentals are really quite excellent right now. So there are a lot of positives for the markets. The one thing that I think could really unnerve the markets is if it started to look like tax reform was dead. We're not there yet. I think we'll get a tax bill, but chances of a big tax bill have diminished over the last month or so.
3 months till open enrollment also for Obamacare. Don't know what's happening
and midterms coming up and health care not happening, so you're not going to have all those savings that they were counting on from health care. It looks like whatever they were going to do on tax reform is going to be a heck of a lot smaller than they were imagining just a few months ago.
That's right. Yep.
All right.
Greg Valliere, have a great weekend.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for stopping by this morning. All right, the U.S. is fining ExxonMobil for violating Russian sanctions while Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was still in charge. The Treasury Department is slapping a $2 million fine on Exxon, claiming it demonstrated reckless disregard for those Russia sanctions. This all stems from a 2014 deal between Exxon executives and this man, Igor Sechin. Sechin runs Rosneft. That's the Russia state-run oil company. He's a close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin.
The Treasury Department didn't specify which Exxon executives were involved and didn't name Tillerson. Tillerson stepped down as CEO last year, but had personal business dealings with Sechin when he ran ExxonMobil. And this move raises concerns over his deep business ties to Russia. Exxon says the fine is fundamentally unfair.
Another record high for the NASDAQ. NASDAQ has never been this high. It's the third record in a row. This is the longest winning streak since 2015. It's evidence investors are unfazed by President Trump's political troubles because huge corporate profits are driving stocks higher. More on that in a few moments. It is still Made in America week, and the president is wrapping it up by touting a deal between these three companies, pharmaceutical companies Pfizer and Merck, and manufacturer Corning. Together, they will produce a new type of glass for injectable drugs.
Pharmaceutical glass packaging will now be made in America. That's a big step. That's a big statement. We're very proud of that. Thank you very much, by the way. And I know they wouldn't have done it under another administration.
Okay, that's an important deliverable for Made in America week. Until now, 98% of pharmaceutical glass packaging was made overseas. But this program has been in the works since 2012. So the president, that last sort of unscripted comment he made doesn't hold there. Corning will invest $500 million initially, but that investment is expected to grow to $4 billion, creating at least 4,000 new high-tech jobs. The CEOs of Pfizer, Merck, and Corning were present at the announcement. The companies still need federal government approval to move forward with the deal, including approval from the FDA for the product itself.
Now, O.J. Simpson, he will be out of prison.
Lincoln Park. Will the special counsel probe lead to presidential pardons? The new reports breaking down the White House's new battle plan.
Shaking things up, the big reason behind big changes in the president's legal team.
And he's set for parole, but still creating controversy. What O.J. Simpson said about his past before a panel decided his future. Welcome back to Early Start this Friday morning. I'm Christine Roman.
Friday. Happy Friday to you. I'm Miguel Marquez. It is 30 minutes past the hour. Up first, explosive new reporting this morning. The president's lawyers are looking for ways to undermine the Russia investigation by special counsel Robert Mueller. The Washington Post and New York Times report attorneys and aides are scouring the backgrounds of Mueller and his staff, searching for conflicts of interest they can use to undercut the Russia probe. The papers cite several sources familiar with the research effort.
The Washington Post also reporting the president has asked about his power to pardon aides, family members, even himself. One advisor told the Post the president was simply curious about the reach of his pardoning authority. This follows the president's earlier attacks on Mueller and other officials connected to the Russia investigation. CNN's Jeff Zeleny has more this morning for us from the White House.
Christine and Miguel, President Trump and the White House increasingly focused on that special counsel's investigation, that independent investigation into the Russian meddling of the 2016 election. But there are indications that the investigation is spreading beyond simple election meddling. President Trump made that indication in his interview with the New York Times earlier this week when he talked about Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller and the idea that he could be looking into the Trump family's finances. Now, the president said he thought that would be outside of the purview of that, but this is increasingly dominating much of the conversation here at the White House. As the legal team is looking at strategies here, the Washington Post and the New York Times are both reporting this morning that the president is also looking into ways to disrupt this investigation. They're looking into the background of the attorneys working on this investigation. It just shows how much time and attention here at the White House is being focused on this. So much fallout reverberating from that interview with the New York Times earlier this week about the president expressing his blistering disappointment with the Attorney General. It has sent shockwaves throughout this West Wing of the White House, largely because the Attorney General is one of the most loyal soldiers in the Trump army. He was one of the earliest supporters. He was, in fact, the earliest Republican senator to sign on. But as we end this week, the 6-month mark of this presidency, this Russia investigation, dominating many things here at the White House. Christine and Miguel.
Jeff Zeleny, thank you very much. As for the Attorney General, he's shrugging off President Trump's attack. The president said he should have hired someone else if he knew Sessions would recuse himself in the Russia probe. The Attorney General is determined to stay put for the time being.
I have the honor of serving as Attorney General. It's something that goes beyond any thought I would have ever had for myself. We love this job, we love this department, and I plan to continue to do so as long as that is appropriate.
Now, with more on the Attorney General's response and damage control at the White House, CNN's Jessica Snyder in Washington.
Christina Miguel, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, he seems to be rebuffing speculation that he might resign in the wake of President Trump's harsh words about him in the New York Times. Well, of course, the president expressed his anger at Sessions' decision to recuse himself from the Russia investigation back on March 2nd. The president saying in that New York Times interview that the decision was, quote, unfair to the president, and that President Trump wouldn't have asked him to become Attorney General if he knew Sessions would remove himself from overseeing the investigation. Of course, those comments drew a lot of speculation, but White House Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, she's clarified in part, saying that the president does have confidence in Sessions, but really was just disappointed in the decision Sessions made to recuse.
Clearly, he has confidence in him, or he would not be the Attorney General. I think you know this president well enough to know that if he wanted somebody to take an action, he would make that quite clear.
Well, Sarah Huckabee Sanders also added to these comments, saying the president does not intend to fire Mueller, but that the president believes the special counsel should not move outside the scope of the investigation, though, of course, the scope of that investigation is up for interpretation about how broad it might be. Christina Miguel.
All right, Jessica, thank you for that. Now, with all that in mind, the president is reshuffling the legal team charged with helping him navigate this Russia probe. Two sources tell CNN the president's longtime personal attorney, Mark Kasowitz, will see his role as lead lawyer on the Russia issue diminish. Now, veteran Washington attorney John Dowd and another Trump lawyer, Jay Sekulow, will take the lead as the president's personal attorneys on the Russia inquiry.
The sources say that by working outside the White House, Dowd and Sekulow's dealings with the president will be protected by the same attorney-client privilege afforded all U.S. citizens. Inside the White House, Attorney Ty Cobb will take the lead on legal and communication strategy for Russia. He'll be effectively replacing communications strategist Mark Corallo, who resigned on Thursday.
All right, Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley threatening to subpoena both Donald Trump Jr. and Paul Manafort to appear before his committee.
We're asking for voluntary appearance. I've indicated that we would subpoena if they don't come.
Is there a deadline associated with that?
We are having a hearing next Wednesday, so obviously we want to hear right away.
Trump Jr. and Manafort are scheduled to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee Wednesday, but neither man has publicly confirmed he will appear. The top Democrat on the committee is California Senator Dianne Feinstein, also reiterating the subpoena threat.
Now, we're also learning this morning Jared Kushner's closed-door session with the Senate Intel Committee next week will be with staff. It's not clear yet when he'll meet with senators themselves. This is now being called an interview, not testimony.
Meantime, CNN has exclusively learned Jared Kushner's status as a top aide to President Trump still being used to lure Chinese investors to his family's New Jersey development. Kushner's name being used in an online promotion by two businesses working with Kushner companies, describing him in Chinese as, quote, the celebrity of the family and, quote, Mr. Perfect Jared Kushner. It comes after his family apologized in May for using Kushner's name during a sales pitch. I thought you were Mr. Perfect.
I am Mr. Perfect. They clearly have it wrong. Confidant of President Trump now under consideration for White House Communications Director. Two senior administration officials telling CNN Anthony Scaramucci has been interviewed for the job and was spotted at the White House Thursday night. The hedge fund manager was an advisor for President Trump's transition team. If he is hired, the big question, what happens to other key members of the communications team? Sean Spicer, the press secretary, has stayed mostly behind the scenes during the communications director's search. It is unclear what happens once that post is filled.
All right, the U.S. is fining ExxonMobil for violating Russian sanctions while Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was still in charge. The Treasury Department is slapping a $2 million fine on ExxonMobil, claiming it demonstrated reckless disregard for the sanctions. It stems from a 2014 deal between Exxon executives and this man, Igor Sechin. Sechin runs the state-run oil company Rosneft. He is a close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin. His assets were blocked as part of U.S. sanctions in 2014 on Russia for annexing Crimea.
Now, the Treasury didn't specify the Exxon executives involved and didn't name Tillerson. Tillerson stepped down as CEO last year, but had personal dealings with Session when he ran ExxonMobil, and this move raises concerns over his deep business ties in Russia. Exxon says the fine is fundamentally unfair.
All right, another record high for the NASDAQ, a third in a row, the longest winning streak since 2015. It is evidence investors are unfazed by President Trump's political troubles, higher corporate profits, and a strong earnings season. More on this in a few moments, but a stunning string of record highs in the stock market. It is still Made in America week, and the president is wrapping it up by touting a deal between these three companies, pharmaceutical companies Pfizer and Merck, and manufacturer Corning. Together, they will produce a new type of glass for injectable drugs.
Pharmaceutical glass packaging will now be made in America. That's a big step. That's a big statement. We're very proud of that. Thank you very much, by the way.
New this morning reports the president's legal team is looking to undercut the special counsel on Russia. It could set up a major conflict between the White House and Robert Mueller.
And the president's legal team shaken up. Who is stepping away from the spotlight and why?
And O.J. Simpson is set to go free after 9 years behind bars. What he's saying about his past as he looks forward to life on the outside. I guess October is when that official parole happens.
Sometime in
right?
October, indeed.
Good morning. Welcome to Early Start. I'm Christine Romans.
And I'm Miguel Marquez. It is Friday, July 21st. Happy Friday to you. It is 5 a.m. here on the East Coast. Up first, explosive new reporting this morning. The president's lawyers are looking for ways to undermine the Russia investigation by special counsel Robert Mueller. The Washington Post and New York Times report attorneys and aides are scouring the backgrounds of Mueller and his staff, searching for conflicts of interest they can use to undercut the Russia probe. The papers cite several sources familiar with the research effort.
The Washington Post also reporting the president has asked about his power to pardon aides, family members, even himself. Now, one advisor told the Post, the president was simply curious about the reach of his pardoning authority. This follows the president's earlier attacks on Mueller and other officials connected to the Russia investigation. CNN's Jeff Zeleny has more from the White House.
Christine and Miguel, President Trump and the White House increasingly focused on that special counsel's investigation, that independent investigation into the Russian meddling of the 2016 election. But there are indications that the investigation is spreading beyond simple election meddling. President Trump made that indication in his interview with the New York Times earlier this week when he talked about Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller and the idea that he could be looking into the Trump family's finances. Now, the president said he thought that would be outside of the purview of that, but this is increasingly dominating much of the conversation here at the White House. As the legal team is looking at strategies here, the Washington Post and the New York Times are both reporting this morning that the president is also looking into ways to disrupt this investigation. They're looking into the background of the attorneys working on this investigation. It just shows how much time and attention here at the White House is being focused on this. So much fallout reverberating from that interview with the New York Times earlier this week about the president expressing his blistering disappointment with the attorney general. It has sent shockwaves throughout this West Wing of the White House, largely because the attorney general is one of the most loyal soldiers in the Trump army. He was one of the earliest supporters. He was, in fact, the earliest Republican senator to sign on. But as we end this week, the 6-month mark of this presidency, this Russia investigation, dominating many things here at the White House. Christine and Miguel.
Thanks to Jeff Zeleny. Now, with all that in mind, the president is reshuffling the legal team charged with helping him navigate the Russia probe. Two sources tell CNN the president's longtime personal attorney, Mark Kasowitz, will see his role as lead lawyer on the Russian investigation diminished. Now, veteran Washington attorney John Dowd and another Trump lawyer, Jay Sekulow, will take the lead as the president's personal attorneys on the Russia inquiry.
The sources say by working outside the White House, Dowd and Sekulow's dealings with the president will be protected by the same attorney-client privilege afforded all U.S. citizens. Inside the White House, attorney Ty Cobb will take the lead on legal and communication strategy for Russia. He'll be effectively replacing communication strategist Mark Corallo, who resigned on Thursday.
Now, helping us understand all this, bring it into sharp focus this morning is political economist Greg Valliere, chief strategist at Horizon Investments. Good morning,
Greg.
to you.
Morning.
So there is a lot of movement at the White House. I take it this doesn't have much of an effect on the stock market or how the economy is going.
Well, it's affected the dollar, I think. Finally, after months and months of people saying this doesn't mean anything for the markets, oh no, I do think the dollar's weakness is because of this. And things have gotten worse this week for the agenda in particular, which the markets really care about.
Well, talk to me a little bit about Russia fever and how each of these developments, kind of puts the agenda further on the back page, if you will. Where are we on healthcare? Where are we on tax reform?
Well, first of all, Christine, I think this obsession that the president has with picking the scab. When we were kids, our parents told us, don't pick scabs, so he keeps picking the scab on Russia. And now you have a situation in the last 48 hours where, maybe he's being investigated for obstruction of justice. What does he do? He indicates that he would like to obstruct justice. So I think the story's gotten a lot worse for tax reform, certainly for a budget deal, and I think the health bill cannot be resurrected.
Even if everything was going peachy keen at the White House and they had a setback with the health care bill dying, they were counting on that in order to get to tax reform. Where does this leave things now?
Absolutely right. The progression was going to be health reform, budget, taxes. Those were the three. Well, if health reform is dead, that does not set a very good stage for the budget fight, which has the Republicans equally divided. Right. So I'm not sure this very radical House budget will even make it through the Senate. If they don't get a budget, that means there's not a reconciliation resolution. It's sounding wonky this morning, but you need that resolution to move ahead on taxes. So if this progression is now derailed, I think we're looking at 2018 before we get anything done on taxes.
If you can't be wonky with us at 5:08 in the morning, you can't be wonky anywhere, right?
Yeah.
There are 3 months to open enrollment. This is what is so shocking to me. There are 3 months to open enrollment where 10 million people are going to have to sign up for health care, and another 22 million who are uninsured right now could be or should be under the law. They should be penalized to get a little fine on their tax return next year for not getting insurance if they don't, right? So this is still the law of the land, yet we have no idea what the next step is going to be in terms of fixing it. And indeed, the president keeps going back to the Russia scab. I think that's a really good analogy. In particular, we heard yesterday from Sarah Huckabee Sanders about Mueller and whether he would stay in that job. Let's listen.
Look, I can't predict everything that could possibly take place in the future and what Mueller could potentially do that might create outrageous, reason not to take action. So I'm not going to talk about hypotheticals. I can talk about where we are today, and that's the position of the president.
Knowing what you know about the demeanor of the president, about how thick or thin his skin is in regards to Russia, how dangerous politically, both for the political economy and the overall economy and for just stability in Washington, is this Mueller situation?
It's huge, Christine. I think that this extraordinary interview with the New York Times made it clear that if Mueller goes to Trump's finances, gets close to Trump's family, he could get fired. And I think if he gets fired, that could lead to a real crisis, an impeachment crisis. As the summer began, I told everybody, including you, that maybe there was a 5% chance of impeachment. It could be up to 20 or 25%, the way things are unfolding right now.
But you said something a second ago about the budget and tax reform being moved into 2018.
Right.
Is that really, the whole idea of getting this done now was to do it ahead of the midterm elections. Right. Is anything really going to get done in 2018 in Washington, D.C.?
Oh, I do think there will be a modest tax bill in 2018. I just think it'll take a long time, and the budget fight will complicate this. And Christine is right. For the insurers, they're going to have to announce their rates. And I think that for Donald Trump to say, I don't own health reform, oh no, he owns health reform. And I think the Republicans are going to have to go to the Democrats and say, we need to help the insurers. So there will be some things happening later this year, but the timetable has been greatly delayed because Trump can't stay.
You know, first of all, he said we're not aware of any of this. Secondly, he raised the question that he thought that, you know, what we reported indicates that the special counsel is going beyond